Hi everyone in Johannesburg. I'm Peter Westoby from Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane, Australia, and the University of Free State there in South Africa. And I would really love to be there with you for this important event on community development and the renewable energy, the REAP program. And I know you're going to be in a rich 2 days of conversation and dialogue, questions, but we decided let's not waste 2.5 tons of carbon emissions by flying over from Australia, and we'd use technology. So the disadvantage of that is I don't get to be a part of the rich conversation with you, but I certainly hope to hear from colleagues what happens. So I've been asked to speak about community development because that's something I've been doing for about 30 years and working in South Africa on and off since 1994. So particularly doing research around the renewable energy program in recent years. And I've been asked to talk about what is community development and a few things. So let's get to it. The first thing I really want to say is I want you to remember, this is something that's very important. Community development is both a citizen project and a professional project. And many of you will be professionals in the room, employed by government or renewable energy corporations or NGOs. But historically, community development is something citizens do. They do it when they come together in groups, in communities, neighbourhoods, localities to solve their problems, achieve their dreams. And people have been cooperating for decades and centuries. And so we need to always kind of respect that people do this. And then we kind of get excited because it's also become a professional project, that we exercise the discipline and the rigour that we are doing as professionals. That's why we come together in the room for 2 days and think about what we're doing. And we learn from history and we learn from one another. So let's just always remember that, citizen and professional. Now, the other thing to say is if anyone ever says to you there is a definition of community development or there is the one way of doing it, they're lying. There are many. There are many definitions. There are many approaches. And it's professionals need to understand the many. But what is common and worth remembering is that community development more or less always has the following. The first thing is what we think of as the movement from I to we. People are alone, they're suffering alone, they're stuck in their lives, they're in unemployment or poverty or isolation, and they don't know how to solve their problems or live their dream. And community development says, if we move from I to we, that is, we find others who will work with us or share the same problem or the same dream, we can achieve things. Humans can achieve things through cooperating that they can't do alone. So it's this I to we. And the second movement that's important and very relevant for you as professionals is the movement from for to with. And that is not to be helping people or doing things for people, because that undermines the principle of people's dignity to solve their own problems. So it's working with or alongside, to stand with people, support them, but journey with them in their dreaming and in their problem solving. Okay, so if you're there to help people, try and shift your attitude to I'm here to work with you. There are other key principles like participation and ownership, which a lot of you would be familiar with. The more people participate from the beginning of an idea, a project, a process, an activity, the better. It's theirs, it's not yours. So these are some of the key ideas. So in saying there's no definition, there's also frameworks and traditions. And just quickly, when I use the word traditions, just 3 or 4, for example, would be the community connecting tradition. It's a tradition of building community, bringing people together where there isn't much community. This is very important in my country, Australia, where we have a lot of isolation, loneliness, people are disconnected. How do we rebuild community? So this tradition of work. So the second tradition we think of as the community education tradition, and this is where we, as a community worker, work with a group or a community such that they can understand the forces, the economic, social, cultural forces that are shaping their lives. Often people blame themselves for their poverty, and the community education helps people realize what are these economic forces that are causing poverty. What are the cultural forces that are leading to people feeling like their culture is not valued? And Steve Biko, would be a very big example in the South African history of black consciousness was about a community education tradition. Black people becoming aware of what was shaping their lives in a way that transformed their thinking. Okay, and Steve Biko ran the black community programs, so he was a wonderful community development worker. The third one we would think of, say, as the community organising tradition. This is where communities come together and mobilise, protest, campaign. We're seeing a lot of this in the community protests against some local government failure in South Africa, and some of that protest leads to violence, property destruction, which isn't necessarily good, but it might be the only way people have their voices heard. But it's a big tradition, and we know from research that within South Africa there are many community organisers behind that movement. And you might be working in a corporation where the community organises against you, and you will need all your skills to actually hear their concerns and respond in constructive ways. A bit like Biko's history, the community organising tradition is very much linked to, say, Frantz Fanon, and we're seeing a revival of Frantz Fanon across South Africa, particularly the student protests and other community protests. So, these traditions are strong. And then the fourth tradition we think of as, say, the community planning tradition. It's where people come together, they particularly work, say, with local government or a corporation, company, to co-design, co-plan what's needed in a place. So this is a rich tradition of participatory planning, participatory budgeting, and you should be very much involved in that work. So they're the sort of four traditions that of the community connecting, community educating, community organising, community planning, and there are others, but that's enough for now. Okay, so we've talked about different traditions. We also think about different frameworks, and when I use the word framework, don't get worried. That just is when we talk about a framework, we're talking about what's concepts are guiding us. And for example, a key framework that people still use is needs-based community development. So the key concept, the framework, is needs. They go into communities, they do needs assessment, they sit down and identify needs, list all the problems. And this is still, used a lot. And in many ways, those of us who are professionals, the discipline of reflection and rigor, have realized this is not a very useful approach, because people get deflated. They lose their confidence when they see all these problems and list all these needs. They get stuck, and it's very hard to then generate energy for change, because ultimately community development needs collective energy. People need to be motivated, desire change, and this isn't easy when people who are been stuck for many years or are trying to change their lives and keep getting caught in cycles. How do you generate the energy? So a new framework that's being used a lot around the world, in contrast to needs-based, is assets-based community development. It's become very popular in South Africa, very popular around the world. It's how do we start by seeing, identifying the assets that individuals have, talents, gifts, skills, ideas, how we bring people together around those assets. What assets do we collectively have in a neighborhood or a community, facilities, economic, financial assets, social assets, that we actually trust each other which is the key social asset, and we have relationships. And then how do we mobilize those assets to deal with the problems? It's not pretending there aren't problems, but we don't start with the problems. So I'm sure there will be many discussions in your 2 days on assets-based community development. So along with needs-based and assets-based community development, there's a third framework. Some of us talk about it as participatory community development. Someone like Robert Chambers is internationally well known for talking about participatory practice, and myself and other colleagues have written about participatory development, where the emphasis becomes the dialogue and the ways people participate in one-on-one relationships, very small groups. The heartbeat of social change is 7, 8, 9 people that really can work together cooperatively and participate fully in making their dream or solving their problem. So the participatory development framework, and the colleague there, my colleague Holler, would be able to direct you to some resources around that. So just to sum that up, we've said there's no definition of community development. There are a few key movements: I to we, for to with. We've talked about 4 traditions: the community connecting, the community education, community organising, and the community planning tradition. And then we've talked about 3 frameworks, the old needs-based, kind of contemporary assets-based, and then the kind of international participatory development approach. So I hope those help guide you in making sense of the work. I was then asked to just say something about corporate-led community development, and you guys are at the cutting edge, because historically community development has been, as I said, a citizen project. Then it became a professional project, very much of government, particularly in India, northern countries like the UK, the big community development programs. These were led by governments, or people were employed by governments. And then community development became a project of non-government organisations, small and large. And in the last 20 years, we're seeing corporations employ community development. Workers, practitioners, mining companies, renewable energy companies, forestry companies. And it kind of, you would all know it evolved out of corporate social responsibility, the imperative for the triple bottom line. The companies need to take care of not just the economy, profits, but the social and the ecological. So, many of you are employed with these kind of backgrounds. And I think a couple of things to say. The first, we've seen an evolution of thinking in the corporate community development world from the first generation of work, which was sort of community relations, where we employed people not so much to really do development work, but to keep communities on side. Like how do we ensure that the corporation is loved in the community, and that we help people with the things they want. So it was more of a community relations exercise. And some of you might be employed as community relations officers or workers. But we've really seen an evolution towards genuine community development, where corporations are taking the development work more seriously than just maintaining a good relationship with community. So I'd like to be aware of that. And the second thing to say is that corporations historically have made a bit of a mistake, where they often employ people in the community relations or community development team that don't really have the skills or the qualifications, because that's just the social stuff, the soft stuff. And that's a huge mistake, because the work we do in the social field, you working with communities, groups, local governments, is much more complicated than the engineering work, for example. That's pretty simple stuff. And we know historically, for example, that most, mining projects fail not because of technical engineering issues, but what we think of as the social license. Mining company loses the social license. They lose the trust, the confidence of a community, and the community then enters into conflict and the project gets stuck. And so, the work you do as community development workers that's about the relationship and genuinely working with communities is crucial. You need to upskill yourself. You need to really work in the way you are now, coming together, thinking, talking, learning from failure, learning from success. Importantly, working from failure, like really learning the lessons, what's not working. So look, I really encourage you to keep doing that. And probably that's the last thing I should say, specifically for you in the renewable energy sector. I'm speaking to you from a country on fire. We've been burning for 4 or 5 months, and we've probably got 2-3 more months ahead of fires. The transition to low carbon economy or no carbon economy is the most crucial challenge facing human beings, and you working with renewable energy companies are at the cutting edge of that. And the challenge of making it not just a transition to wind, water, solar is to also make it a just transition that communities really benefit. And that's what you are all employed to do. Make sure that what those projects you're doing in these very remote regional parts of South Africa, where communities are historically disadvantaged, marginalised from the economy, from the benefits of the national development. You're at the cutting edge of making sure there's a just transition, that people do benefit. So, keep up the really good work. And I hope you have a great conversation in the next day or two, however long there is. And I'm looking forward to hearing from Dr. Holler Walkus and others I know, what kind of things have come out of this. Okay, so good luck. Goodbye.